Churches played an important role in the life of the early families, meeting social needs as well as spiritual. One of the earliest Methodist churches was established in 1835 at what is now Flint Hill. Another early church, a small log church known as Fellowship, was built as early as 1836. In the early churches such as Fellowship, the tradition of sacred harp singing was part of the worship service. On August 3, 1872, the Youngsville Baptist Church was organized with Reverend A.K. Tribble serving as its first minister. The beginnings of this church, as well as that of the First Methodist Church, was inspired by a Bush Arbor revival on Hertzfeld Hill. The First Presbyterian Church was established in 1894. The Great Bethel Church was organized in 1880.
First one that I remember hearing about was a primitive Baptist church that was out west of town. It was about where Elizabeth Russell Allison lived, out where the Russell homes are out there. And then there was a church down around where the Coca-Cola plant is now, which was a church for black people, and they had a cemetery there and a little church. And I think that church was the one that was really the beginning of Reverend Nunn's church there. The church that was at the Baptist church that was out west of town, they built a church there, and then when the logs began to sort of rot, they decided that they would build a new one, and they started looking for another place because the people from the east side of town that came out there to church had to pass by up where the Baptist church is now. They had a cockpit and a gambling thing, and people drank a lot, the men did, and cursed a lot, and so they didn't like to have to go by all that to get to their church out there. So they moved in and built a church in town. And then the Methodist and the Baptist churches that are now the First Methodist and the First Baptist got their start, I think it's about 1872, on this, where this property is here, this Hurstville home. Before the Hurstville home was built here, and there was a big tree out on the hill, and somebody says it's still there. I don't know which one it would be, and I don't know how anybody knows that for sure, but anyway, for a long time it was there. And the Baptists and the Methodists had there weren't any churches other than the ones I mentioned that I know about in town. So they met up here on under an arbor and had a revival and said they were going to build churches in town. So the Baptists were first, and the Methodists organized the churches. So the Baptists organized first, and the Methodists about a year later organized, and out of those two things have come the Baptist church. And the Baptist church is right where it's been for ever since they started. And the Methodist church was on the corner where, as I said, Thomas Motors is, and then after the fire it moved down to where it is now, and it's been there ever since. The First Presbyterian Church was on the corner up there, what I was talking about, was the same place, and it stayed there until they built their new church out to where it's now located now.
Some of the most interesting stories about the church services deal with some of the customs and traditions in the community, such as walking to church, all-day services and dinner on the grounds, recalled by Mrs. Ernestine Billups.
We walked to church, and we went to different churches every Sunday, and we never missed a Sunday. We lived approximately, my grandmother lived out, they called it Day Rockford Road at that particular time, where the Spring Hill projects are now. And that was the country, as they called it. And we would walk from there to Pearson Chapel Road, is approximately 10 to 12 to 15 miles. This was in the 50s, in the early 50s. I was 7 or 8. From my grandmother's house, I had my sister and brother, Mary Pearl and Edward, my Uncle Freddie, my Aunt Al, Aunt Betty, Aunt Mary Walls, Aunt Aline, and the neighbors next door, who was Bud Goggins, and he had 5 children. baptisms at Darien. Elam, I can't remember baptism at Elam number 1, but Darien we went to the branch, as they call it, the creek, and they would baptize there after the revival. They only baptize once a year. That would be during the third Sunday of August.
The churches attempted to keep people grounded in good moral principles and to preserve tradition.